The restaurant glowed with the golden warmth of chandeliers and polished wood, a place where power brokers dined and families like mine pretended to be whole. House of Prime Rib in San Francisco's financial district was packed that evening. Waiters in white shirts glided between tables carrying heavy trays of prime rib creamed spinach and loaded baked potatoes. At our table, my father, Richard Monroe, leaned back in his chair, his silver hair catching the light, his expression already expectant. It was his 68th birthday, and he had demanded that all of us gather. I sat quietly at the far end of the long mahogany table, a glass of water in front of me, trying to stay invisible. I had learned long ago that invisibility was survival in my family. Beside him, Elaine Monroe, my stepmother, wore a crimson silk blouse that reflected the candlelight. Her hand rested lightly on my father's sleeve, as if she owned not only his arm, but the whole evening. I saw the smirk curling her lips before she even spoke, and I braced myself without knowing why. The hum of conversation around us dimmed in my ears, as if my body knew what was coming before my mind did. Elaine raised her glass, her diamond bracelet sparkling as she did. She smiled with a triumph that felt rehearsed, then said in a voice pitched high enough for every cousin and sibling at the table to hear, "Oh, Lydia." She began with mock sweetness. "I hope you don't mind, but I finally did something about those dead stocks you were hoarding. They were just sitting there collecting dust, so I sold them this week and cleared my credit card debt. $43,000 put to real use at last." My fork froze halfway to my plate. The clatter of silverware from other tables rang in my ears. My cousin stopped mid-laugh. For a moment, I could not breathe. She had said it like a joke, like an anecdote to amuse the family, but it landed like a knife across my chest. My father threw back his head and laughed, his voice carrying across the room. "Smart thinking, Elaine," he said, patting her arm with pride. "At least someone around here knows how to make money work. Lydia would have sat on those worthless pieces of paper forever. You finally put them to use." My stomach lurched, bile rising in my throat. I forced myself to set my fork down carefully, afraid my hand would betray the shaking building in my chest. The blood rushed in my ears, and for a moment I thought I might actually faint. I stared at the polished rim of my water glass, tracing the condensation with my finger to anchor myself. I could feel every pair of eyes on me. The table erupted into murmurs, some clapping politely, as if Elaine had done a service, others exchanging amused looks. My younger half-brother smirked. My aunt leaned toward my father, whispering praise of Elaine's cleverness. Not one person questioned it. Not one person asked me. It was as if my consent never existed. The humiliation pressed down so hard, I thought it might crush me into the velvet seat. Elaine sipped her wine, basking in the approval, then looked straight at me with mock concern. "You don't mind, do you, dear? You always seemed so sentimental about those old things. Better that they go toward something practical." My chest tightened. I felt heat rising in my face, but I said nothing. I had learned silence the way other people learned piano scales, through repetition until it was second nature. When you grew up in a house where every word was twisted, silence became armor. My father nodded as though sealing a lesson. "This is exactly what I mean, Lydia," he said. "You hold on to things out of stubbornness. Elaine has vision. She knows how to act when action is needed. Learn from her." His words sliced more deeply than any knife. I wanted to scream that those stocks were mine, that they represented years of work and sacrifice, that she had no right. But my throat closed around the words like a vice. The humiliation was complete because it was public. The waiters passing by could hear. The couples at nearby tables could hear. My family wanted me diminished, and they had just made me the evening's entertainment. My water glass trembled in my hand, and I quickly set it down. Inside, something surged. Rage, yes, but also clarity. I remembered every time Elaine had cut me down since she entered our lives. The times she called me careless, the times she told my father I lacked ambition, the way she controlled the household money so I was forced to beg for basics in college. I remembered the night she tore my debit card in half and laughed while I cried in the kitchen. And now she had stolen again, and my father applauded her theft. The injustice burned so brightly inside me that I felt dizzy. Yet on the surface, I stayed still. I lifted my chin slowly, let my eyes rest on Elaine, and for the first time I did not look away. Her smirk faltered just slightly, as though she had not expected me to meet her gaze head-on. I did not give her the satisfaction of words. I simply let her see the storm gathering in me. The table returned to chatter, my father ordering another bottle of Cabernet Elaine, glowing in the attention. I sat in silence, but every nerve in my body was awake. Every memory of childhood humiliation rushing back, every slight echoing louder. I realized then that my silence was no longer armor. It was a weapon waiting for the right moment. And that moment was coming. You could see it in my eyes if you looked closely enough. The humiliation had shifted into something sharper, something inevitable. The night after the dinner at House of Prime Rib, I walked home through the quiet streets of Pacific Heights, my heels striking the pavement in a rhythm that echoed years of silence. The city glowed around me, bay lights flickering in the distance, cable cars clanging faintly as they rolled past. But inside me, another city rose, one built of memory and scar tissue, every street named after humiliation. To understand why Elaine's smirk at that dinner burned so deeply, you'd have to walk those streets with me. You'd have to see where it began. I grew up not in wealth, though my father liked to play the part of a successful man, but in a cramped old house in Bernal Heights. From the outside, it looked charming enough, painted pale blue, with white trim, a view of the city if you climbed the back fence. Inside, it was suffocating. The air smelled constantly of cigarette smoke and fried food, heavy curtains drawn to keep the neighbors from seeing in. My mother had died when I was 7. Her absence wasn't just a missing chair at the table, it was a crater, a vacuum that swallowed light. My father remarried within a year, and Elaine arrived with her sharp perfume and sharper tongue. She didn't just move into the house, she colonized it. I was 8 the first time she told me I was careless. I had left my homework on the coffee table, a math worksheet with smudged eraser marks. She picked it up between 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. "You'll never amount to anything if you treat life like this," she said, and tore the page in half right in front of me. My father, reading the paper, didn't even look up. That became the pattern. Elaine would wound, and my father would let the wound bleed. Control was her favorite game. She handled every bill, every bank account. When I was 10, she cut off the cable subscription because she said my grades weren't high enough. When I was 12, she took away my bus pass because she claimed I wasn't using it responsibly. I walked 3 miles to school that week under the drizzle of San Francisco fog while she drove past me in her silver sedan. She rolled down the window once and said, "Discipline builds character," before speeding away. My father laughed when I told him. He called it tough love. By the time I reached high school, her control stretched to money that should have been mine. Birthday cash from relatives disappeared before it touched my hands. She claimed she was saving it for me. When I asked at 16 about using that money for textbooks, she said, "You need to learn to do without. Life won't hand you everything." Then she bought herself a leather jacket the next day. One evening that same year, I gathered the courage to ask my father directly about college savings. I'd been accepted to a summer program in engineering at Berkeley, and I needed help with the tuition. He leaned back in his recliner, beer in hand, and said, "Ask Elaine. She manages it." Elaine was in the kitchen counting receipts. I approached her, rehearsing my words carefully. There was money from Mom's life insurance, wasn't there? Could I use some for the Berkeley program? She turned slowly, her eyes cold. Then in one swift motion, she slapped me across the face. The sound echoed in the tiled kitchen. My skin stung, but worse was my father's response when he walked in moments later. He saw the red mark, saw the tears in my eyes, and still, he said, "Elaine wouldn't have done it if you didn't deserve it." That night, I lay awake listening to the foghorns on the bay, each low moan carrying across the city like a lament. I promised myself that if I ever escaped Bernal Heights, I would never let them control me again. But promises made by children often crumble when the weight of family presses down. Still, that ember smoldered inside me, waiting for years to ignite. When I finally turned 18 and was accepted into Stanford's biomedical engineering program, I thought the promise I had whispered to myself in the fog all those years earlier might finally come true. I packed my bags with trembling hands, certain that once I crossed the threshold of that old Bernal Heights house, I would never again be just the girl who flinched at her stepmother's voice. I believed college would mean freedom, but Elaine had other ideas. My acceptance letter had barely arrived when she announced at the dinner table that there would be no money for me to use. The insurance payout that had been meant for my education was, according to her, already invested in household improvements. She gestured toward the new granite countertops in the kitchen as proof. "You should be grateful, Lydia," she said, her tone syrupy and cruel. "You'll come home to a nicer house now." My father grunted his approval, chewing his steak as if the conversation had nothing to do with his daughter's future. That summer, I worked double shifts at a bookstore near Union Square and waited tables at night just to scrape together enough for my first semester's books and fees. Elaine mocked me each time I dragged myself home after midnight, my apron still smelling of fryer grease. "Look at you," she would sneer, barely making minimum wage. "Maybe you're not cut out for college at all." Her laughter echoed through the house, and I swallowed my fury, telling myself that each hour I worked was another brick in the wall of my independence. At Stanford, I carried that same weight. I could not join study groups at cafes because I had to rush to my part-time lab assistant job in Palo Alto. I could not afford the dorm meal plan, so I subsisted on ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches. When my classmates went out for pizza after exams, I returned to my dorm room to count every dollar in my worn leather wallet. Yet I excelled. Each time I saw an A at the top of my papers, I imagined showing it to my father. But whenever I did, he simply shook his head. "Grades don't pay the bills," he muttered. Elaine would add, "And you still owe us for letting you live under our roof." It was in my sophomore year that her control crossed from cruel to invasive. I had opened my first checking account, proud of finally managing my own money. Within weeks, I noticed small withdrawals, $20 here, $50 there, vanishing without explanation. When I confronted the bank, they told me someone had my account information. My heart sank. Only Elaine had been near my paperwork at home. When I dared to ask her, she looked at me with mock surprise. "Don't be ridiculous. Why would I need your little scraps of money?" she said, then smiled as though savoring a private joke. The sabotage wasn't limited to money. She intercepted my mail once, hiding a scholarship offer until it had nearly expired. When I discovered the unopened envelope weeks later at the bottom of a drawer, she shrugged. "I thought it was junk. You should be more responsible." Her lies piled higher than the bills she claimed to pay on my behalf, and my father, ever passive, allowed her stories to stand as truth. By junior year, I realized that survival required secrecy. I changed my mailing address to the campus post office. I worked under the table tutoring other students in calculus to build a hidden savings fund. I guarded my passwords like state secrets, scribbling them in coded notes only I could decipher. Every small victory, every dollar saved, every hidden grade report was fuel. Each one whispered, "Hold on, Lydia. They cannot keep you under forever." But each holiday break when I returned to Bernal Heights, Elaine tightened her grip again. She would question every expense, mock every ambition. "Biomedicine. No one even knows what that is," she scoffed once as I tried to explain my research. "You should study something practical like accounting." My father chuckled and nodded his loyalty always with her. The resentment grew heavy in my chest, but beneath it something else stirred, an iron will hardening a determination that one day they would see the truth and it would burn them. Graduation should have felt like liberation. When I walked across the stage at Stanford, cap pressed firmly on my head, the sun blazing down on the campus lawn, I thought the chains of Bernal Heights had finally cracked. My classmates threw their caps into the sky, their families cheering, snapping photos. I looked for my father in the crowd and saw him clapping politely, Elaine's sunglasses reflecting the stage lights. She leaned toward him, said something I couldn't hear, and he laughed. They left early before I even found them. My celebration dinner was a sandwich alone at the Palo Alto Caltrain station, watching families drive away together. That loneliness hardened into resolve. Within weeks, I landed my first position on a fledgling research team based out of a cramped garage near University Avenue. We were 5 people fueled by instant noodles and an almost reckless belief in what we were building, a neural interface technology that could change how the brain connected with machines. I threw myself into the work with the ferocity of someone who had nothing left to lose. Nights blurred into mornings, my hands stained with ink from whiteboards and my mind buzzing with possibility. Elaine, of course, dismissed it immediately. When I came home one weekend, eager to share, she cut me off mid-sentence. "So you're tinkering with toys? That's not a career, Lydia. That's a hobby." My father nodded in agreement. They never visited the lab. They never asked about patents or funding. To them, I was still the careless girl who misplaced homework on the coffee table, and perhaps that was my advantage. Because while they underestimated me, I quietly built something extraordinary. Our team's breakthrough came after 2 years of sleepless trial and error. My design for a biomedical implant became the backbone of our prototype. Investors began to take notice. Venture capital firms filled our garage with promises and term sheets. For the first time, I saw numbers that made my head spin, funding rounds in the tens of millions. When equity was divided, I received 150,000 shares. At the time, they were valued at pennies each. On paper, my stake looked like nothing. But in my gut, I knew better. I had lived my whole life with people telling me what had no value. I wasn't about to make that mistake. I kept those shares locked away in a brokerage account untouched. Elaine found out, of course. She had a way of snooping, of rifling through mail when I visited home. "So you're holding on to worthless paper again," she said, once waving an old statement she'd found. "One day you'll thank me for teaching you not to be so foolish." I snatched it back, heart pounding. I told myself she couldn't reach them. I told myself passwords would protect me. But deep down, I knew her need for control was a hunger that never stopped. Years passed. Our company moved from the garage to gleaming offices in downtown San Francisco. We survived rejection's FDA hurdles and long nights where failure felt certain. Then at last, the approval came. 6 months later, we went public. Our IPO opened at $1,200 per share. My 150,000 shares, once mocked as worthless paper, suddenly represented a fortune beyond imagination. I didn't tell my family. I didn't owe them the satisfaction. I lived modestly in a Pacific Heights condo, my neighbors assuming I was just another consultant, a woman in tech blending into the city's rhythms. But every time I passed the skyline, every time I saw our company's name in headlines, I felt that ember inside me burn hotter. The girl who had walked home in the fog after a slap in the kitchen was gone. In her place stood a woman holding a treasure that could topple the very people who had dismissed her. What I didn't know then was that Elaine was still watching, still waiting, still convinced that whatever was mine could be hers. And when she reached into my account to steal $43,000, she had no idea she was playing with fire that had been building for decades. The night air outside House of Prime Rib was cool, sharp, with the scent of the bay drifting in from Embarcadero. My heels clicked against the sidewalk as I stepped away from the glowing restaurant windows, desperate for space to breathe. Inside, laughter still rippled around the table where Elaine basked in her petty triumph. My phone vibrated again and again in my purse, urgent and relentless. I pulled it out, heart-hammering, and saw the name Marcus Green, my attorney. Marcus rarely called unless something was serious. 7 missed calls, 12 text messages. My fingers shook as I swiped to answer. "Marcus," I whispered, stepping farther away from the noise of traffic. "Lydia." Thank God his voice rushed through the line, tight with urgency. "Where are you right now?" "Family dinner," I said, glancing back through the restaurant's windows at the glowing chandeliers. "What's wrong? Listen carefully. Did anyone besides you access your Fidelity brokerage account today?" My stomach dropped as if the sidewalk had given way beneath me. "How do you know about that?" "Because Fidelity's fraud department called me 20 minutes ago. A large transaction was flagged. Someone liquidated 150,000 shares from your account this morning. They wanted to verify authorization." "Lydia, did you place that order?" The world tilted. The streetlight above me flickered, and I pressed my hand to the brick wall for balance. "No," I whispered. "No, I didn't." Who had access, Marcus demanded. No one. At least, no one should have. Years ago, Elaine saw some old paperwork, but I've changed everything since. At least I thought I had. My voice trembled, my mind spinning. Marcus's silence stretched for a long second. Then, he said carefully, "Lydia, those shares. Do you know what they're worth right now? They were old founder shares. Elaine thinks they're worthless. They're not worthless. His tone sharpened. Neuralink Technologies closed today at $2,180 a share. 150,000 shares at that price equals $327 million. The number crashed into me like a wave, cold and merciless. My knees buckled and I slid down the wall until I was crouching on the sidewalk, phone pressed to my ear. Say that again. 327 million, Marcus repeated. And someone just sold them without your authorization. Fidelity froze the proceeds, roughly 280 million after taxes. But Lydia, this is no longer just about money. This is federal. Securities fraud, wire fraud, unauthorized access to financial accounts. Whoever did this is facing prison. Across the street, headlights swept by, and the sound of a passing munibus roared in my ears, but I barely heard it. All I could see was Elaine's smirk at the table, the way she had raised her glass like a queen, claiming victory. My chest constricted until I gasped for air. Lydia, are you listening? Marcus pressed. I'm here, I managed, voice raw. You need to tell me right now, do you want to press charges? Through the window, I saw my family still laughing, oblivious. My father's hand rested proudly on Elaine's shoulder, his face glowing with approval. My half-brother tapped his phone. Jessica scrolled through hers. They had no idea the storm gathering outside. No idea that the petty theft they praised was about to explode into a federal case. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles went white. Every humiliation, every dismissal, every slap of words from Elaine came flooding back. For years, they had diminished me, told me I was nothing, laughed at my ambitions. And tonight, Elaine had stolen the crown jewel of my life's work, all while my father applauded. I closed my eyes and whispered into the night, Marcus, I want them to understand exactly what they did. Marcus's voice steadied low and deliberate, the way he spoke when he knew I was close to breaking. We have two main paths forward. Option 1 is criminal. I notify the FBI and the SEC. Elaine is arrested within 48 hours, likely charged with securities fraud and wire fraud. For an amount this large, she's staring down 10 to 20 years in federal prison. No parole in federal time. Her life as she knows it would be over. My chest tightened. I could see her face in my mind, still glowing with self-satisfaction, laughing over her glass of wine, while my father praised her cleverness. The thought of her being led away in handcuffs should have felt like justice. Instead, it felt complicated, heavy, the way family always is. Marcus continued. Option 2 is civil. We freeze all accounts associated with your family while filing a damages suit. If her lawyer convinces her to settle, she could avoid prison, but she would lose almost everything she owns. Either way, Lydia, she cannot escape, but I need to know where you stand. Do you want her in prison, or do you want her ruined in every other way? I pressed my forehead to the cool brick wall, my breath fogging in the night air. I thought of every shift I had worked to pay for school, while Elaine mocked me, every dollar she stole, every slap of her words, each one reinforced by my father's silence. Rage twisted inside me so sharp it almost steadied me. Through the restaurant window, I watched Elaine lean into my father, whisper something that made him laugh. My stomach lurched. They thought they had won. They thought I was powerless. And maybe for years I had been. But not now. Not with the truth burning in my ear through Marcus's voice. What happens if we go public with this? I asked my own voice, sounding strange, harder than before. Then the humiliation is total, Marcus said. A public record of the theft, her name attached to it forever. She would have to stand in front of others, admit what she did. That might be worse for her than prison. A cold clarity spread through me. Elaine had spent years thriving on appearances. She built her entire identity on being admired, envied, respected at the country club luncheons she insisted on attending. To strip that away in front of everyone, to force her to speak her guilt aloud, would cut deeper than any cell. I want her to feel what I felt tonight, I said slowly. Humiliated, exposed, powerless. Marcus paused, and when he spoke again, there was something like approval in his tone. Then we plan carefully. But Lydia, you need to be sure. Once you confront her, there's no going back. I looked again through the glass. My father was gesturing animatedly, telling a story I had heard before. Elaine laughed on cue. Jessica stared at her phone, oblivious. None of them knew that $327 million hovered like a thundercloud above their heads, ready to strike. I felt my breathing steady for the first time all night. "I'm sure," I said. "I want her to understand right here, right now." Marcus's voice grew brisk, the lawyer in him rising to the surface. "Stay where you are. I'm 10 minutes away. I have the transaction reports printed. I'll bring everything market value statutes proof of unauthorized access. If you want to confront her in that restaurant, we'll do it on your terms, not hers." I closed my eyes, letting the weight of his words settle over me. 10 minutes. In 10 minutes, the balance of power could shift. For decades, Elaine had held the reins, pulling them tighter every time I tried to breathe. For decades, my father had let her. Tonight, with a single call, Marcus had handed the reins back to me. I stood slowly, brushing brick dust from my skirt, pulling in a deep breath of the cool San Francisco air. The fog rolled low along the financial district streets, curling around street lamps, muffling sound. My heels clicked with new purpose as I paced, rehearsing not lines but silence. I would not need speeches. The documents would speak louder than anything I could say. My phone buzzed again, texts from Jennifer Chin, my financial advisor. "Lydia, I just saw the Neuralink sale. Please confirm authorization. Another from David Park, my old partner from the garage days. Fidelity flagged your account. Are you safe?" Each message tightened the knot of reality everyone who mattered in my professional world already knew. Elaine thought she had pulled off a petty theft. She had no idea she had dragged herself into a storm that spanned Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and federal law. Marcus called back. "I'm outside. I'll meet you at the curb." I turned to see his black sedan pulling up headlights washing over the damp pavement. He stepped out, tall briefcase in hand, his tie slightly loosened, but his expression razor sharp. Without a word, he opened the case and handed me the first page. Transaction record. 150,000 shares sold that morning. Total proceeds, $326,400,000. Average price, $2, $176 per share. My hands trembled, but not from fear anymore. Trembled from fury, from vindication, from the knowledge that this paper was the sword I had been waiting for. "You hold the truth now," Marcus said quietly. "Use it wisely." I nodded, tucking the papers back into the folder. My reflection glimmered in the restaurant's window, my hair slightly mussed from the fog, my eyes sharper than I remembered them ever being. For once, I looked less like the forgotten daughter and more like the woman who had built something that could never be dismissed again. Inside, the laughter still carried. Plates clinked, wine flowed. Elaine's silhouette leaned toward my father, her posture smug and easy. She had no idea that with every passing second, her little victory was crumbling. I pushed open the door. The warm glow of chandeliers washed over me, but I felt no comfort in it. Instead, I carried the cold clarity of truth in my hands. As I walked toward the table, Marcus trailing a step behind, the chatter faltered. Eyes turned, forks paused. My father looked up, confusion flickering. Elaine's smirk twitched, uncertain for the first time that evening. I slid the folder onto the table, the papers whispering against linen. My heart was steady, my voice low but firm. "Let's talk about those stocks." The silence that followed was thick, electric, the kind that precedes a storm. I had returned not as the invisible daughter, but as the reckoning. The moment I laid the folder on the white tablecloth, time seemed to stutter. A waiter passing with a tray of prime rib slowed his step, sensing tension. My father's laughter died mid-breath. Elaine's glass hovered just shy of her lips, her smile, frozen eyes narrowing with a flicker of unease. I think I said, my voice calm though my pulse thundered in my ears. "We need to review exactly what was sold today." Jessica blinked up from her phone, finally noticing the shift. My half-brother frowned. My father leaned forward, his brow furrowed as though this were some petty family squabble, nothing worth ruining a birthday dinner over. "Lydia," he said, irritation lacing my name, "if this is about those old stocks." "This," I interrupted, sliding the first page out of the folder and placing it in the center of the table, "is about $327 million. The words struck like a glass shattering on marble. The clatter of forks dropping echoed faintly from nearby tables. Elaine's lips parted, but no sound came. My father stiffened. Jessica gasped, hand flying to her mouth. Marcus stepped forward, then his presence commanding in a way only a lawyer who lived in courtrooms could be. He set down additional documents with practiced precision. Fidelity flagged this morning's transaction. He explained, his tone carrying easily across the hushed restaurant. 150,000 shares of Neuralink Technologies were liquidated. Average price per share $2,176. Total proceeds over $326 million. My father barked a short, incredulous laugh, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. That's absurd. Elaine was talking about, what was it? 43,000? That can't be the same thing. It is, Marcus said. He flipped another page toward him. Founder shares. Issued years ago. Retained and held. They were Lydia's. Every single one. Elaine's face had gone pale, but she rallied, lifting her chin. This is ridiculous. Lydia was careless with her paperwork. She left things lying around old accounts no one cared about. I just acted responsibly. She never even noticed them. The fury that had simmered inside me for years found its voice. No, I said, locking eyes with her. You acted like you owned me. Like everything of mine was yours to manage, to control, to take. And you thought these shares were worthless because you never bothered to understand what I built. But they weren't worthless. They were everything. The weight of my words hung heavy. Diners at nearby tables were no longer pretending not to watch. Phones hovered, some discreetly recording. My father's face reddened, caught between denial and dawning comprehension. He jabbed a finger at Marcus. This is a family matter. You have no place here. Marcus didn't flinch. When a family member commits federal securities fraud, he said evenly, it stops being a private matter. Elaine's hand trembled as she set down her glass. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in her eyes. Not annoyance, not disdain, but real fear. And in that flicker of fear, I felt years of silence begin to crack. Elaine leaned forward suddenly, her voice rising brittle with panic. This is being blown out of proportion. I only saw an account that had been left idle for years. The paperwork showed pennies per share, Lydia. Pennies I thought I was doing you a favor, finally putting something stagnant to use. Her words spilled out quickly, too quickly, like water through fingers. My father seized the opening, his voice booming across the table. Exactly, Elaine was practical. Lydia, you've always been sentimental about the wrong things, holding on to scraps. She cleared dead weight. That's what a responsible adult does. The familiar sting of his dismissal sliced at me, but this time I did not shrink. I slid another page across the table, the fidelity record glowing under the chandelier light. Here is the timestamp, 9:37 this morning. 150,000 shares. Neuralink Technologies. Market value $327 million. Not pennies, not scraps, not worthless. Jessica leaned closer, her eyes scanning the numbers. She whispered almost to herself. Oh my God, it's real. Elaine snatched the paper, scanning it with wild eyes, her hand shaking as she flipped it around to my father. This is exaggerated. Stocks fluctuate. You can't trust today's number. Marcus's voice cut in calm, decisive. The sale executed at those prices. This isn't an estimate. These are transaction records signed and certified. Even if the market crashes tomorrow, the fact remains, Elaine liquidated assets worth hundreds of millions without consent. The federal statutes are clear. My father's face flushed deeper. He jabbed a finger at Marcus again. You don't come into my family's dinner and start throwing around words like federal statutes. This is between us. We'll fix it privately. I turned on him, my voice steady though my chest thundered. Privately. Like when Elaine took my scholarship letter and buried it in a drawer. Privately, like when she siphoned my checking account in college. Privately, like every humiliation you let her pile on me while you sat in your chair and called it discipline. The table went silent. Even Jessica looked stunned, as though hearing these truths for the first time. My father's mouth opened, then closed, his hand frozen mid-air. Elaine tried again, softer this time, attempting charm. Lydia, dear, think about what you're saying. We're family. Family doesn't air dirty laundry in front of strangers. I leaned in, my eyes unblinking. Family doesn't steal $327 million and call it love. Gasps rippled from nearby tables. A man 2 seats down dropped his fork. Elaine's lips pressed tight, her painted composure cracking. She turned to Richard for rescue, but his face was hard, uncertain. For the first time, his confidence wavered. I pressed the final page onto the table, the legal summary Marcus had prepared. This isn't dirty laundry. This is theft. And it's written in black and white. The documents lay between us like a mirror reflecting every truth they had tried to bury. My father's fist struck the table with such force the silverware jumped a wineglass tipped and red liquid bled across the linen. Enough, he thundered, his voice carrying through the hushed dining room. This family is not going to be torn apart because you want to parade your grievances, Lydia. You've always been dramatic, always the victim. Elaine made a mistake at worst. You should be thanking her for trying to help. The words landed like a slap, the same tone he had used my whole life to silence me. But now the weight of the papers on the table steadied me. I refused to shrink back into that obedient child he thought I still was. Jessica flinched at his outburst, her phone forgotten in her hand. Dad, she said softly, this isn't just a mistake. Look at the numbers. Look at what Marcus brought. It's all real. He turned on her face, flushed with rage. Don't you start. You've been fooled by Lydia's stories for years, always playing the saint, always making us the villains. You don't understand how hard Elaine has worked to keep this family together. Elaine reached for his arm, but her fingers trembled. For once, she was not in control, her usual poise unraveling as she realized Richard's anger was no longer protecting her, but exposing the cracks. She hissed, "Stop shouting, you're making it worse." I met my father's glare with calm I barely recognized as my own. You think I'm dramatic. You think I've been inventing villains. These documents don't lie. The SEC has already been notified. Fidelity has already frozen accounts. The people you dismiss as my imaginary allies are lawyers, advisors, and regulators. This isn't theater. It's fact. His jaw worked as he searched for words, but only anger came. You ungrateful! After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us, by dragging your stepmother's name through the mud. I leaned forward, my voice low but carrying. After everything you've done to me, after years of silence, while she cut me down, while she stole opportunities, while you let her, tonight was the final straw. She didn't just humiliate me, she stole nearly $350 million and bragged about it in front of you. And you applauded. Jessica's eyes brimmed with tears. Dad, she's right, she whispered. I never wanted to see it, but it's true. We all ignored her. We let Elaine walk all over her. And now, her voice trailed off, breaking under the weight of realization. The fracture was visible, raw and jagged, splitting the family down the middle. My father's face twisted with fury and disbelief. Elaine shrinking beside him. Jessica caught in the middle, and me, finally steady, finally unwilling to retreat. I straightened in my chair, the folder still open before me like a shield of truth. You can shout all you want, I said evenly, but the numbers won't change. The theft won't disappear. And I won't be silenced this time. Elaine's composure cracked at last. Her hands fumbled for the stem of her wineglass, but she set it down too quickly, the liquid sloshing over the rim. I didn't know. She stammered, her voice, brittle trembling. I thought those shares were worthless, just old paper lying around. I only wanted to clear some debt before it swallowed us. Lydia, you have to believe me. You never meant, I cut in sharply. My voice was steady, sharper than the knife lying untouched beside my plate. You never meant to open my mail when I was in college. You never meant to take money from my accounts little by little and call it teaching me discipline. You never meant to hide scholarship letters. You never meant to slap me when I asked where Mom's insurance money had gone. Each memory landed like a stone, piling up before her. Her face blanched. She glanced at my father, desperate, but he could offer no shield now. His jaw was tight, his eyes darting as though for the first time even he could no longer deny what had been laid bare. Elaine whispered, "I was trying to protect you." The words rang hollow, a cheap disguise stretched over years of cruelty. A murmur rippled through the surrounding diners, people shaking their heads, whispering to each other. Phones still hovered, discreetly recording. Elaine's empire of appearances was collapsing in real time, and she knew it. Marcus leaned in his tone, even but ironclad. "Mrs. Monroe, the law doesn't consider intent when unauthorized access is this clear. You executed trades worth hundreds of millions. Ignorance isn't a defense. And your admissions tonight?" He gestured subtly toward the patrons filming, "will be difficult to walk back." Elaine's lips quivered. Tears welled, but never fell. She looked at me, and for the first time I saw her stripped of arrogance, the power she had worn like armor gone. "Please," she whispered, "don't let them take everything. Don't let them put me in prison. We can make this right privately. No one has to know." I sat back studying her, letting the silence stretch until it nearly snapped. Then I said, my voice quiet but cutting through the air, "Everyone already knows. Fidelity knows. The SEC knows. The FBI will know if I choose to push forward. My colleagues know. The people in this restaurant know. The only person who didn't know until tonight was you, because you thought you could take from me forever without consequence." Elaine covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. My father shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't speak. Jessica, pale and wide-eyed, reached for my hand under the table. For once, her gesture was not neutral, it was a choice. I let the silence hang one more beat, then drew the folder closed with finality. From this moment on, I decide what happens next. Not you, not Dad, not anyone but me. And in that charged pause as Elaine crumbled and the room held its breath, I felt the weight of decades lift. For the first time in my life, control was mine. Marcus cleared his throat, and the sound seemed to reset the room. The low hum of other conversations had faded. Diners lingered, pretending to sip wine while every eye remained fixed on our table. He placed his leather briefcase on an empty chair and opened it with the kind of care one usually reserved for sacred objects. From inside, he drew a packet of documents thick enough to change a life. "Mrs. Monroe." He began, his voice carrying the weight of authority honed in countless courtrooms. "You are now standing at a legal crossroads. Tonight, here at this very table, I will present your only two options." Elaine's head jerked up, panic flashing in her eyes. "Options?" she repeated, her voice quivering. Marcus set two folders down between us, sliding them across the white linen with a measured hand. "Option 1, he said evenly. "We notify federal authorities immediately. The FBI, the SEC, the Department of Justice. The evidence is already sufficient. The charge is securities fraud. Wire fraud. Unauthorized access to financial accounts. The transaction amount, $327 million, places you in the highest bracket of sentencing. You are looking at 10 to 20 years in a federal prison without parole." Elaine gasped as if the words themselves had reached across the table and struck her. My father leaned forward, his face darkening. "This is outrageous." She didn't know the value. She thought she was helping. Marcus did not flinch. "Ignorance does not absolve the crime. Mr. Monroe, the law is clear. Unauthorized access is theft regardless of personal justification." Elaine pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "And the second option," she whispered. Marcus tapped the second folder. "Civil resolution. You sign over every asset you own, your home. Vehicles, retirement accounts, jewelry, anything of value to offset the tax liability created by this unauthorized sale. You issue a written and public apology admitting full responsibility. You agree never to access or interfere with Lydia's accounts again. This route spares you prison time, though your financial life will be in ruins." The words struck the table like a gavel. Elaine's breathing quickened. My father reached for her hand, but his was shaking too. Jessica's wide eyes darted between Marcus, Elaine, and me. Marcus looked at me then. "But the decision rests with Lydia. She is the victim here. She decides whether to press charges or accept a civil settlement." The spotlight shifted every gaze turning my way. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the child being scolded or the daughter being dismissed. I was the one holding the choice, the one commanding the room. I sat straighter, folding my hands over the folder. My voice came low but clear. I decide what happens next. Elaine's face crumpled, her carefully constructed mask disintegrating before my eyes. For once, she understood the power she had stolen for decades no longer belonged to her. Elaine's voice broke, first rising shrill enough that nearby diners winced. "Please, Lydia, you can't mean this. Prison, losing everything I didn't know. I thought I was saving you from wasting your life on stocks you would never use. $43,000 paid real bills. It kept us afloat. I never imagined." Her words dissolved into sobs, shaky and uneven. For years, I had imagined this sound, Elaine undone, stripped of her cold confidence. Yet hearing it now in the warm glow of chandeliers and clinking cutlery, I felt no triumph, only a sharp clarity. Tears were her last weapon, another mask to hide behind. My father leaned forward, his face flushed with desperation. "Lydia," he said, his tone low and forceful, "you need to stop this right now. She is your stepmother. She raised you. Maybe she was strict, maybe she made mistakes, but she was here after your mother died. Family is family. You don't send family to prison." I turned to him, my voice steady. "Family doesn't steal $327 million and call it love. Family doesn't spend decades breaking me down and then expect me to cover their crimes." His jaw tightened, but he pressed on, his eyes pleading now. "Think of appearances. Think of what this will do to us, to me, to our name. Do you really want the Monroes dragged through the papers, our friends whispering behind our backs?" I almost laughed. The irony was too rich. For years, they had been more concerned with appearances than with truth polishing their social circle while I starved on ramen in Palo Alto. "You're worried about whispers," I said. "I'm worried about justice. Maybe if you had paid attention to what I built instead of dismissing it, you'd understand the difference." Elaine reached across the table, her manicured nails trembling. "I'll give the money back. I'll fix it. Just don't make it public. Don't humiliate me." I drew the folder closer to me, my hands calm, my breathing even. "It's already public. Fidelity knows. The SEC knows. Marcus is here. Diners are recording this as we speak. You humiliated yourself the moment you touched what wasn't yours. Tonight isn't about hiding. It's about owning what you did." Jessica, silent until now, spoke softly, her voice breaking. "She's right, Elaine. Dad, you both need to see it. We all treated Lydia like she was nothing, and she built something incredible while we ignored her. This is the cost of that ignorance." Elaine shook her head wildly, her tears spilling now. No, you don't understand. I can't lose everything. I'll do anything, Lydia. Anything you ask." The room hushed further, every ear bent toward my response. For the first time in decades, I wasn't the one begging. I was the one writing the terms. I let the silence hold before answering, my eyes fixed on Elaine. "Then you'll listen, because from now on, my terms are the only ones that matter." I drew a slow breath, steadying my voice so every word would slice cleanly. "You want to know my terms, Elaine? Here they are. First, you sign over every asset you own: the house in Pacific Heights, the condo in Tahoe, your retirement accounts, every piece of jewelry, every car. Everything goes to cover the liability you've created with this unauthorized sale." Elaine's face drained of color. "All of it," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "All of it," I said. "You tried to take what I built. Now you will pay the price with what you claim is yours." My father slammed his palm flat against the table, rattling the glasses. "This is madness, Lydia, you're talking about leaving us with nothing. Think about what you're doing. You'd destroy your own family." I turned my gaze on him, calm and unflinching. "You destroyed this family long ago when you chose silence every time Elaine cut me down. Tonight is just the reckoning." Gasps rippled from the surrounding tables. I knew strangers were recording whispers flying across the dining room. Elaine's hands fluttered helplessly in her lap. "What else?" she asked weakly, as if bracing for another blow. You'll write a public apology. I continued, my voice sharper now. Not some vague letter full of excuses. A clear statement: you stole my stocks, you thought they were worthless, you were wrong, and you admit it. That apology will be posted where everyone can see it: your social circles, your friends, your colleagues. You humiliated me for years. Now you will face humiliation rooted in truth. Elaine shook her head violently, strands of her carefully styled hair falling loose. No, I can't. People will never look at me the same way again. Exactly, I said, letting the word hang. My father's face darkened. You've gone too far. This isn't justice, it's revenge. What happened to the daughter I raised? I met his eyes and spoke with the clarity of someone who no longer feared being unheard. She grew up. She survived you. And she's not here to play your script anymore. Elaine reached across the table, her voice breaking into sobs. Please, Lydia. Anything but public shame. I'll give up the assets, I'll disappear quietly. Just don't make me a spectacle. The diners leaned closer, straining to hear the verdict. Jessica's hand touched mine under the table, a quiet signal of support. For once, she wasn't silent. She deserves this, Jessica said softly but firmly. I leaned back, folding my hands. The apology is non-negotiable. You built your life on appearances. Now appearances will be what dismantle you. That's justice. Elaine sagged in her chair as if the weight of my words pressed her down. My father looked frantic, his authority unraveling with every second he failed to control the room. For decades they had held me beneath their thumb. Tonight, in front of strangers and family alike, I was the one dictating the future. Elaine's breath came in shallow bursts, her hands clutching the edge of the table as if she could anchor herself against the tide sweeping her away. I can't do this, she whispered. You're stripping me of everything. My home, my reputation, my future. Please, Lydia, there must be another way. I leaned forward, my voice firm but not raised the way a surgeon might explain a procedure before cutting. There isn't another way. You made the choice the moment you entered my account. You believed my work was worthless. You gambled with my future to erase your debt. Now you face the consequences. The apology, the assets, the surrender of control, those are not punishments. They're justice. Her shoulders shook. For the first time in my life, Elaine Monroe was small, fragile, exposed. The room around us was utterly silent, diners frozen in their seats, eyes-wide phones still capturing every word. My father's face contorted desperation, eroding the last of his authority. Lydia, listen to me, he said, voice rough, almost pleading. She's your stepmother. She's my wife. Do you really want to destroy her like this? Do you want your family's name dragged through the press? Remembered only for scandal, I turned toward him, my voice steady. Our name was never protected. You allowed Elaine to drag it down every time you let her steal from me, humiliate me, belittle me. Tonight isn't destroying the family. Tonight is exposing what it has always been. Jessica's eyes brimmed with tears, but her voice was clear. Dad, it's over. You can't protect her from this. Lydia's right. We all ignored the truth for too long. Marcus adjusted his glasses, his tone clipped professional. Mrs. Monroe, I'll have the documents drawn up tonight. You'll sign over the assets and the apology will be drafted and published under legal supervision. If you refuse, Lydia will press charges and we proceed criminally. You have 24 hours to comply. Elaine crumpled forward, her head in her hands. I'll sign, she choked out. I'll do it. Just, please, not prison. Marcus nodded once. Then we proceed with settlement. He slid a pen across the table as if sealing the moment. My father slumped back, his chest heaving. The fight had drained from him, leaving only silence. His empire of control, built on Elaine's cruelty and his willful blindness, had collapsed in the span of an hour. I drew the folder closed and rose slowly, the strength in my posture radiating through the hushed room. This ends now, I said, my voice carrying across the restaurant. From this moment forward, I answer to no one in this family. I built my life without you, and now the world knows it. As Marcus gathered the documents and Elaine wept into her hands, the weight of decades lifted from my shoulders. For the first time, I was not the powerless daughter, but the woman who had taken back everything and more. The Chronicle Hall stood tall in downtown San Francisco, its facade of glass and steel reflecting the pale morning sky. I had passed it countless times before without a second thought, but on this day, its towering presence felt symbolic, like a stage built not for music or theater, but for reckoning. Inside, rows of journalists filed into their seats, the air heavy with anticipation and the faint hum of cameras being powered on. The front banners carried logos from Bloomberg, The Wall Street Journal, and TechCrunch. The story had already spread like wildfire, and now the world was here to watch it reach its climax. Marcus stood at my side, calm and unreadable as ever. His briefcase was clasped tightly in his hand, his papers prepared down to the last line. Jessica hovered nearby, uncharacteristically nervous, her eyes darting around at the crowd of reporters flash as microphones. "Are you ready?" she whispered. I inhaled deeply. "I've been ready for years." At the far side of the stage, Elaine sat hunched in a chair, her once pristine image in ruins. Her hair was limp, her face drawn makeup unable to mask the sleepless nights that must have haunted her since the dinner at House of Prime Rib. She clutched the statement Marcus had forced her to approve, her knuckles white against the paper. My father sat beside her, his posture stiff, his gaze fixed somewhere above the audience, as though detachment could erase humiliation. When the moderator called the press conference to order, a wave of silence rolled through the hall. Cameras blinked, microphones tilted forward. Elaine was nudged toward the podium. She stood with visible effort, her heels wobbling slightly against the polished wood. For a moment, she looked out at the sea of faces, and I saw the realization dawn: there would be no escape, no friendly circle to shield her. Only truth. Her voice cracked as she began. "My name is Elaine Monroe." She read, eyes glued to the paper. "I accessed my stepdaughter Lydia Monroe's brokerage account without her authorization. I believed the shares I found were worthless based on outdated information. In reality, they were valued at $327 million. I sold them without consent and kept a portion for myself. This was wrong. It was theft." The words hung in the air, heavy, undeniable. The clicking of cameras grew frantic, recording every syllable, every tremble in her voice. She continued stumbling, almost choking on the words. For years, I dismissed Lydia's work. I belittled her accomplishments. I interfered with her opportunities. I thought I knew better. I was catastrophically wrong. She built something extraordinary, and I tried to take it from her. I apologized to Lydia, to Neuralink Technologies, and to the public for my actions. Gasps rippled through the hall. Some reporters exchanged incredulous looks. Others leaned forward with gleaming eyes, sensing history being made. Elaine's face collapsed against the bright lights, her mask entirely gone. And I, standing at the edge of the stage, calm and poised, felt the audience turn toward me, recognition dawning like sunrise. The second Elaine lowered her paper, the silence shattered. Reporters surged forward in their seats, voices rising like a storm. "Mrs. Monroe, did you truly believe $327 million in stock was worthless? Did you intend to conceal the sale from Lydia permanently? Were you aware of the legal implications of unauthorized access?" Elaine blinked against the barrage, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Her earlier bravado had evaporated. Now she looked like a woman drowning in a sea of questions with no lifeline. My father placed a hand on her shoulder as if to steady her, but his eyes darted nervously across the flashing cameras. The moderator tried to regain control, but the flood had broken. Every reporter in the hall wanted their headline, their clip. Elaine shrank back from the podium, her paper crumpling in her hand. It was then Marcus leaned close to me and whispered, "They're not here for her. They're here for you. Step forward." I walked toward the podium, each step deliberate, heels clicking against the polished stage. A hush spread as cameras pivoted, lenses shifting from Elaine's defeated form to me. The sound of shutters snapped in quick succession, capturing the moment. When I reached the microphone, I adjusted it slightly, letting the anticipation build. "I am Lydia Monroe," I said, my voice even, but carrying across the hall. "Founding biomedical engineer of Neuralink Technologies." The words landed like a declaration, and the room leaned in. For 8 years, I worked with a team of brilliant innovators to build something we believed would change the world. I continued. We built it in a Palo Alto garage on little more than faith and stubbornness. Those 150,000 shares that were taken from me represented not just money but years of sacrifice, nights of ramen noodles, days of doubt and relentless belief in a vision. A reporter in the front row shot up his hand. "Miss Monroe, why didn't your family know about your role in the company until now?" I met his gaze without flinching. Because when I tried to explain years ago, they didn't want to hear it. It was easier for them to believe I was wasting my time than to admit they didn't understand my work. So I stopped trying to prove myself to them. I focused on proving it to the world. A murmur of approval rippled through the hall. Another voice called out, "What will you do now with the liquid assets recovered from the sale?" I allowed a small smile. "Reinvest, because I still believe in what we're building at Neuralink. That belief hasn't changed since the day I walked into that garage." The room erupted in more questions flashes popping like fireworks. And in that moment, the story had shifted. Elaine was no longer the focus. The press, the cameras, the headlines, they belonged to me. The questions kept flying, but I didn't shrink from them. If anything, each one gave me another chance to claim the ground I had fought so hard to reach. "Miss Monroe, how does it feel knowing someone in your own family tried to erase your life's work?" I paused before answering, letting the silence stretch until every camera leaned closer. "It feels familiar," I said, because for years that's exactly what happened in smaller ways. My ideas were dismissed, my ambition was mocked, my achievements were ignored. What Elaine did with those shares was only the final act in a play she had been rehearsing for decades. The crowd murmured, pins scratching recorders held high. Another reporter pressed, "So what made you keep going despite the dismissal?" I lifted my chin, scanning the faces before me. "Resilience is not something you're born with. It's forged in fire." Every time someone told me I couldn't, I kept going. Every time they said it was worthless, I held on tighter. Resilience is choosing to believe in yourself when no one else will. And tonight, standing here, I know it was worth every sacrifice. The hall filled with the sound of rapid shutters. I could almost see the headlines forming "Engineer Betrayed by Stepmother Emerges as Symbol of Strength." From the corner of my eye, I saw Elaine wilt further into her chair, her shoulders caving as though each of my words pressed down on her. My father sat stiffly beside her, his face pale, his jaw locked powerless for the first time in his life. A woman near the front raised her voice. "Miss Monroe, do you see yourself as a victim of family betrayal or as a victor over it?" I let the question hang before I answered. "Both," I said finally. "Betrayal happened. That's undeniable. But betrayal doesn't have to be the end of your story. It can be the spark that ignites your strength. Tonight is proof of that. I am not defined by what was taken from me. I am defined by what I refused to let them destroy." The room erupted in a flurry of claps from a few gasps from others. Even hardened reporters trained to mask emotion leaned back with something like admiration. One final question cut through the din. "What message do you want others who've faced betrayal, especially within their families, to take from this?" I steadied myself, feeling the weight of every eye. That you are not powerless, that silence only feeds those who try to control you, and that sometimes the greatest justice isn't revenge, it's truth. Speak it, show it, own it, and watch how quickly the world shifts in your favor. The applause this time was real, not just the frantic typing of keys or the blinking of lenses. It rolled through the hall like thunder, a sound I had never imagined hearing for myself. For once, I wasn't invisible. I was undeniable. The moderator eventually stepped forward, trying to calm the storm of raised voices, flashing cameras, and hands that waved for one last question. "Thank you, members of the press," he said firmly. "That concludes today's statement." But even as he spoke, the energy in the hall surged like electricity. Reporters crowded together, trading notes, speaking into cameras, calling their editors. I caught fragments: historic case, betrayal inside a family, and engineer emerges as symbol of resilience. The narrative was no longer Elaine's crime, it was my survival. Elaine, still slumped in her chair, covered her face with trembling hands. Her statement, her apology, her entire identity had been swallowed by the spectacle. She looked broken in a way I had never seen hair-disheveled eyes hollow stripped of the armor she had once worn so easily. My father sat beside her like a statue, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. His authority, his denial, his endless excuses, they had all crumbled under the weight of truth. Jessica hovered near me, her voice barely audible over the din. "You did it," she whispered. "For the first time, they all saw you, not just as their daughter or their stepdaughter, but as who you really are." I allowed myself a small smile, not of triumph, but of recognition. "They should have seen it years ago," I murmured. "But better late than never." Marcus closed his briefcase with a decisive click. "It's done," he said quietly. "The documents are binding. The apology is public, and the world now knows what was hidden for too long. Elaine will comply or she faces prison. Either way, this is resolved." As the crowd began to disperse, I stepped away from the podium, the sound of applause still echoing faintly. Reporters followed, shouting my name, asking about the future of Neuralink, about what I would do with the fortune that had almost been stolen. I gave only one answer as I left the stage I'm building. I always have been. Outside, the crisp San Francisco air greeted me cool and steady against my skin. Chronicle Hall loomed behind me, but ahead stretched the skyline towers of glass and steel rising against the fog. Pacific Heights awaited the quiet condo I had built into my sanctuary. For the first time, walking through the city didn't feel like moving through shadows. It felt like stepping fully into light. Elaine's downfall was complete. Her reputation gone, her wealth stripped, her control shattered. But more importantly, my silence was broken. The story had shifted forever from the invisible girl they once dismissed to the woman who stood her ground and forced the truth into daylight. I paused on the steps, listening to the hum of the city. For years, I had waited for someone to defend me. Now I knew I had been my own defense all along. And as the cameras continued to flash behind me, I walked forward, every step echoing a truth that could no longer be denied. Betrayal had tried to define me, but resilience had made me unforgettable. Pacific Heights has always been known for its sweeping views, the kind that stretch across the bay to Alcatraz, the Golden Gate, standing proud against the fog. But on the night after the press conference, as I stood on my balcony with a glass of Napa Valley Red in hand, the view felt different. It wasn't just a postcard scene anymore. It was freedom, tangible and vast. For the first time since childhood, I breathed without feeling the weight of someone else's hand pressing me down. The city glittered below, cable cars clanged faintly in the distance. A breeze lifted strands of my hair as I leaned against the railing, watching headlights weave through the streets far beneath me. I thought about the girl I once was walking home from Bernal Heights with sore feet and tear-stained cheeks, telling herself that someday she would escape. I wished she could see me now. Elaine and my father had disappeared into the shadows of their own making. Within 24 hours of the press conference, their assets were transferred under Marcus's supervision. The Pacific Heights home that Elaine had once flaunted as her trophy was now in my name. Her accounts were drained, her jewelry cataloged and seized, her vehicles repossessed. She had begged for privacy, but her downfall made headlines across every major paper. Stepmother steals fortune engineer reclaims it. Betrayal in San Francisco ends in humiliation. The words were everywhere. Richard refused to speak to me after Chronicle Hall. Jessica told me he spent his days pacing, muttering about ruined reputations, about the name Monroe dragged through the mud. But even he couldn't undo the truth. His silence had enabled Elaine for decades, and now his silence left him alone, his credibility shattered alongside hers. I felt no urge to see them. I had spent too many years chasing their approval, clinging to the hope that one day they might recognize my worth. Now I understood I had never needed them to see me. I had needed to see myself. That night, I poured another glass of wine and walked through my condo, letting my fingers trail across the polished marble counters, the bookshelves stacked with volumes of science and philosophy, the framed patents that lined the hallway. Every detail was mine. Chosen, built, earned. This space was no accident. It was the culmination of every long night in Palo Alto, Every rejection I had endured, every cruel word I had swallowed and turned into fuel. When my phone buzzed on the counter, I glanced down and saw a text from Jessica. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I'm proud of you. I watched every second of the press conference. You were incredible. I stared at her words, unexpected warmth rising in my chest. Jessica had been the neutral one, always floating between sides, never choosing, never defending. Perhaps now she had chosen at last. I typed back, "Thank you. If you mean it, prove it. Stand with me, not behind them." Setting the phone down, I looked out once more at the city that had been both battlefield and sanctuary. For the first time, I felt not just like a survivor of betrayal, but the architect of my own destiny. The weeks after the press conference unfolded like watching a storm recede across the bay. The chaos had peaked, the thunder rolled, and now all that was left were the ruins scattered in its wake. Elaine and Richard were no longer the monarchs of their social circle. Their names became whispers at dinner parties, the kind people spoke with raised eyebrows and lowered voices. For decades, Elaine had lived for appearances: glossy hair, designer dresses, luncheons at the Pacific Union Club. All of that was gone now. I didn't see her fall directly, but I didn't have to. Marcus kept me informed. The repossessions, the foreclosure notices, the forced sale of the Tahoe condo, the public apology still pinned across her social media despite her desperate attempts to delete it. He told me she rarely left the smaller rental they managed to scrape together after losing the house. Neighbors described her as a ghost of herself, moving quickly from door to car, with sunglasses covering her face, hoping not to be recognized. And my father? He had always believed his authority was absolute. He barked commands and the world fell in line. But authority built on silence is fragile, and when Elaine's foundation cracked, so did his. He had stood in Chronicle Hall that day as though it were a court he could preside over, and instead, he had been reduced to a powerless bystander. I imagined him pacing their rented apartment, anger simmering, but with no one left to command. The man who once told me family doesn't air dirty laundry now had his own name washed across headlines as the husband who defended fraud. Jessica called me one evening not long after. Her voice was tentative, cautious, as though testing ground she wasn't sure would hold. I've been thinking about everything she said, about how I always stayed quiet, about how I let you stand alone. Her honesty surprised me. I sat at my kitchen counter, glass of wine in hand, listening to the hesitation in her tone. And I asked, not cruel, just steady. "And I don't want to be silent anymore," she said. "I saw you at Chronicle Hall. You weren't just strong, you were free. I want to understand you, Lydia. I want to stand with you now if you'll let me." For a moment, I felt the old impulse to push her away, to remind her that neutrality had been its own betrayal. But then I remembered the girl I once was begging for someone to stand beside me. Jessica's words didn't erase the years of silence, but they cracked open the possibility of something new. "Then prove it," I said softly. "Not with words, with actions." She didn't protest. She simply said, "I will." After the call ended, I sat in the quiet of my condo, the city lights shimmering beyond the balcony doors. A strange calm settled over me, not the brittle calm of survival, but the deep quiet that comes after truth has been spoken and heard. For so long, my life had been defined by their refusal to see me. Now the world saw me, and perhaps finally Jessica did too. The calm was its own kind of power. Not loud, not vengeful, just steady like the tide pulling against the shore. For years, I had been waiting to be acknowledged. Now I no longer needed acknowledgement to know who I was. On the last Sunday of the month, I woke before sunrise. The city was still the fog rolling thick across the bay, softening the skyline, until even the Golden Gate looked like a shadow of itself. I stood at the wide windows of my condo in Pacific Heights, coffee warming my hands, and let the silence hold me. For years, mornings like this had been heavy with dread, the fear of Elaine's footsteps in the hallway, the sting of my father's voice dismissing me before I'd even spoken. But now the silence was mine, and it was beautiful. Neuralink filled much of my days again the way it had in those early years in the Palo Alto garage. The IPO had transformed us into a company watched by the world, but the essence remained late nights of innovation, whiteboards crowded with formulas, the hum of possibility in every conversation. When I walked into the lab, engineers who once knew me only as a quiet presence now looked to me with respect. They had seen the press conference. They knew the story. And though I hadn't built Neuralink for recognition, the recognition made every sacrifice feel seen. Investors wanted reassurance. Headlines speculated about whether betrayal would rattle my resolve. But each time I spoke to them, I said the same thing: betrayal doesn't weaken you, it clarifies you. They listened, nodding, perhaps hearing not just a business pitch, but a truth that could apply to their own lives. I thought often of legacy, not in the sense of money or even patents, though I had both, but in the sense of what story would remain when I was no longer here to tell it. For so long, my story had been one of silence. Now it was one of survival, more than that of transformation. If there was one message I wanted etched into the record, it was this: that what others call worthless can become priceless when held with conviction. Elaine and Richard faded into the background of my life. They existed now only as cautionary tales, names whispered in shame, their power dissolved like salt in water. Jessica kept her promise. She came to the lab one afternoon, sat across from me with wide eyes as I explained the technology I had once tried to share with our family. She listened this time, really listened, and when she finally spoke, she said simply, "I'm proud of you." It didn't heal the past, but it planted something new, something fragile but real. That night, I poured a glass of wine and stood again on my balcony. The city pulsed with light, cable cars winding their way up the hills, the bay glimmering like liquid silver under the moon. I whispered to the wind, as though to the girl I had been, "You made it. They tried to break you, but you built something greater instead." For the first time in my life, I knew betrayal no longer defined me. Resilience did, and peace, the kind that comes not from vengeance but from truth, was finally mine.